Yeah, so that and the Orwell story there, the chapter. And of course, to just be on the same stage as, the author of the Slumdog Millionaire, it's not, yeah, I hope you all enjoy our company as well. But while you have been through that journey, let's sort of take you on a walk under trees and into forest and, all that. So, uh, yes, so when this thing was starting about, so me to uh, introduce the book and sir and all that. So my first impression was, I've been through uh, a lot of information on wildlife and butterflies and trees, and I was just hoping, I hope it is not so scientific and with data and all of that, that doesn't sort of appeal to the masses. It just remains for the expert. But when I went through the book, my God, it's awesome. You must all go through this. It's when you talk trees, so this is obviously the most thing that we need most to survive for us and for our sort of generations to come. And I spend a lot of time at where I live, inside the forest, and every morning almost, I go for a walk in the forest. It's a very blessed kind of landscape with incredible bird life, one of the highest probably for the region, the highest tiger numbers. Our elephants are there, and our river is teeming with mass seal and what have you. The great hornbill flies there, the bird count is incredibly high. But all that would not be there if there was no forest. And no forest, what is a forest? It's trees and grasslands. So no trees, no wildlife. No trees, no tiger. No trees, no us. So that's as clear as that. And I can go on. I mean, this is the book talks about, what's so interesting about the book? That it's simple. It will appeal to the student, to the scientist. And it is not just about the whole Latin or the scientific name of the book and what have you. But it's about, it's about those things that impress us as children or as grown-ups. The largest tree in the world, the fattest tree in the world, and the oldest tree on all of that, and it's really mind-boggling. So the tree becomes life. The tree becomes something that we can identify with. So that has been done very, very well with the book. So I should not take any more time and let Mr. Nitesh take over.
A very good morning to all of you. First of all, let me thank Jahnavi Prasad and Mrs. Desai and others who invited me here. This book, before I come to the book, I must say that I have a very great connection with Nainital. Way back in 70s when I was working on my PhD. The plant I worked on came from Nainital, in fact. And that's something that binds me to this place, and I'm very happy to be here because of that reason as well. This book is the result of various experience I had as a botanist, as somebody who spent a lot of time in the Department of Biotechnology, Government of India, and then later after I superannuated from my work, I was working on this book for about 8 years. Actually, when the inspiration to write this book came when I was working in the National Institute of Immunology, where you have a beautiful campus in Delhi, and I have a great mixture of exotic and natural trees. And the campus is breathtakingly beautiful, with rolling landscape, and the buildings actually merge with the background so beautifully. And you can't distinguish where the official labs and things end and where residential complexes take over and so on. So they have made it so beautiful. And the botanist in me could not help being enthralled by the seasons that the trees heralded. And I could not actually contain myself in going absolutely gaga over these trees there. So, in the National Institute of Immunology, most of the people working there are molecular biologists. They are very good in their work. Um, they didn't have so much knowledge about the trees on their campus, although they're very proud of what they own on their campus. So I was the first botanist to reach there, and then probably the last one to have reached there too. And I decided that, I will write about one tree per month, about their trees, some naturally naturalized, some exotic, some which are part of that landscape. And I started sending this to the scientists there. And I was very, very delighted with their warm and happy reception of whatever I wrote. And then they said, please keep on writing about trees of our campus, and we love this, our children love this, and keep on informing us. So that's how I wrote about some 10, 12 trees of the campus, some exotic, some locally naturalized, and so on. And also I did some tree walks for college students and teachers, and everything was going well. But then I started having self-doubts. I mean, I am teaching these people about trees of India. How much do I know about trees? Which is the scientifically certified oldest tree in India? Which is the tallest tree in India? The longest, the largest canopy in the world or in India, and so on. How much have these trees, or which trees have contributed to our own culture, religion, mythology? Individual trees, not species as a whole. And then I started thinking, I don't know the answers to these questions. And nor, to my knowledge, most people who teach botany, learn botany, know these answers too. Because there is not enough literature on these things. If there is information, it's widely scattered, highly inaccessible, and in most cases totally unreliable, because nobody does these scientific studies on the age of a tree, for example. If you go to any temple in this country and you ask, how old is this tree? They'll say, sir, 5,000 saal to hoga. So 5,000 being, some benchmark for any tree which is sacred. And you would start thinking, if every tree that is so important is 5,000 years old, now which is the oldest? How much older should it be? So I said, somebody should do this, compile this list. But at that time I was already 65. I didn't have a fund, or I didn't have a team. Early on I decided that I would not write on any tree which I haven't seen myself in its natural habitat, and talk to the communities in which these trees are embedded. So it was a very daunting task for me. But then I said, okay, let me take the first step. And I started digging into, this literature of all kinds, architectural and anthropological, internet browsing, books, journals, etc. And I found that I made a short list of some 300 to 350 potentially iconic trees, so-called iconic trees, which were connected either to history, for example, eventually related to a personality in history, or an event in history, or a place in history. Or it may be standing out because of its age, oldest, that kind of thing, or dimensions, the largest, tallest, etc. Also trees which are of importance to us through religion, through culture, through myths and other things. Or they may be botanical oddballs. They don't conform to botanical traits which are supposed to be having. So then the question was travel. Having decided that I would actually visit each tree and then do this book. So I didn't know how many years it would take. But I started somewhere, and eventually it took me some 8 years or so, with COVID pandemic in between and logistics went haywire and so on and so forth. So at the end of that, I'm very happy that I could visit these trees. I shortlisted some 75 out of the potential list, and that's what is in this book called Iconic Trees of India, published by Rowley Books just about a month and a half ago. And that's where my journey began. Right?
Uh, yeah, it would be very nice for you to share, I suppose, I mean, when you go through that, it talks about trees where freedom fighters were hung, or a tree that is the loneliest tree in India. So, if you would just tell us a bit more about those very, very important, those very interesting facts, actually. So, it'd be nice.
Basically, I divided, for the purpose of my book, I classified the tree into 5 or 6 groups. Age was one category, dimensions, physical dimensions was a second category. Third category was botanically standing out for some reason, because it may be a very rare introduction, extremely rare plant, rare tree in our country, or it could be rare groupings of trees, and then importance in religion or culture or mythology, connection to history, as I mentioned, and finally, I started looking at them from this angle. And in this book, you will find trees that are connected to very happy events, say the Raj Tilak of a king. For example, the first Dogra king of Jammu and Kashmir was actually his Raj Tilak ceremony was performed under a Putranjiva tree in Jammu area. And there are other kinds of trees which are associated with violence, dark past, murder, and so on and so forth. For example, the Adil Shahi dynasty maintained a babak tree in Bijapur, in Karnataka, northern Karnataka. They were using this tree to behead people who were criminals or enemies of their state, and so on and so forth. There are other trees on which freedom fighters were hanged. They were used as gallows by the then British establishment. There are many trees dotting across the length and breadth of this country where there were many freedom fighters were hanged. Also, there are trees which are, very unique. As I said, botanically unique. For example, there is a tree here which I have called the loneliest tree in India. And that is because you all, at least I'm sure many of you will have heard of the giant sequoia. Giant sequoia, for those who are not initiated into this, is perhaps the largest single trunked tree in the entire world in terms of trunk volume. The oldest and the largest of such things is in the USA, in California, and it has a volume of 1,500 cubic meters, not counting the branches or the roots. Only the trunk volume is that much. Now, I came across such a tree in a very remote village in the middle of nowhere in Kashmir, just about 13 kilometers from the famous tourist place of Gulmarg. There is a small village called Yarika, and it's in the field research station of an institution called the Indian Institute of Integrated Medicine, which is headquartered in Jammu. Now, one single tree of this giant sequoia is found in this remote place. And if you go and see this tree there, it is so majestic, 25 meters in height and huge. It stands out. Even if you are not a botanist or anything, you know that there is something special about this tree. And how did this come there? Traversing a huge distance across oceans, and these trees are endemic to California at high altitudes. How did this one tree come to Kashmir? The answers were never clear, because nobody seems to have kept a record on who brought the tree there. Today, if you look at the tree, it is producing cones, both pollen and seeds, but it cannot actually reproduce because there are no seedlings at all anywhere nearby. And there is no such other tree anywhere in India, perhaps the whole of South Asia. So I felt very sad about the tree. because, it has no kin. Nobody knew where it came from. Those who brought it have forgotten about it. Within Yarika itself, people may know about it, that village. But if we went to Jammu or Srinagar or anywhere, nobody seems to have heard of the tree. This was discovered in 1975 by a professor called Dr. D.L. Dhar from Kashmir University. He published a paper in Indian Forester and everybody forgot after that. At that time, it was 45 years or something, according to estimates. So currently, it must be close to 100 years. So standing in that spot for 100 years, unknown, unrecognized, not even having kins around it, and unable to reproduce. It is accustomed to Kashmir's climate, but it can't reproduce itself. So I really felt sad about it. And the only good consolation about this tree is the institute in whose premises it is standing got two paintings made by a local Jammu artist called K.K. Gandhi, and one painting is in the institute headquarters in Jammu, the other is in Central Drugs Research Institute in Lucknow. So otherwise it has just not been recognized anywhere. There is one more tree like this, single tree anywhere in India, that is a double coconut tree in the Indian Botanic Garden, Kolkata. And this is a female tree. And these trees, it's a palm. Palms live for 100 years, 120 years, 150 years, and so on. This particular double coconut, it's actually, the fruit is the largest known fruit in the plant kingdom, barring, of course, some vegetables that we grow. Pumpkins become big and so on. But wild plants, the one fruit actually weighs about 25 kilograms. And this is, much more, 10 kilos more than 15 kg luggage you are allowed when you travel budget airlines. So, if you took a double coconut with you, you will have to pay extra baggage for that anyway. This big. This is the heaviest known fruit in the entire kingdom. Now, this took about really 80 years or so to produce its first flower in Kolkata. And then it revealed itself as a female palm. Now the question was, where are the males which produce pollen if you wanted to reproduce that palm? So fortunately it was in the botanical garden, so they searched, they looked for a suitable, groom for this palm. And they brought some pollen from Sri Lanka, Paradenia Botanic Garden. And then they pollinated the flowers, and it didn't work. It failed to produce any fruits. So then they sent another expedition to get more pollen from Myanmar, a botanical garden there, and this time they succeeded in producing 2 fruits. And fruits actually take 1.5 years to mature on a tree. Now unfortunately, after about 10 months or something, both the fruits fell down on the ground. And they're still trying to germinate those 2 fruits, and we don't know whether they will succeed. Meanwhile, this palm is now on its deathbed, and we don't have any other tree equivalent to that. If you go to Paradenia in Sri Lanka that I mentioned, botanical garden, it's one of the oldest in this part of the world. They have a whole avenue full of double coconuts, and we don't have one. So I do hope, for the sake of posterity, people do get one more palm, or at least several more palms to do this. So these kind of stories, for me, no 2 trees are alike. Every tree has a story to tell. Every story is, it touches your heart and soul. And I always say trees speak to you, your soul actually. And they are related to our culture, our heritage. Every tree connects us to our past. And it's a bridge to human past, actually. It connects us to generations of time, because some of these trees stand there for centuries, and some of them go for thousands of years. So the most ancient tree in India is a 2023-year-old tree in Lahul Spiti region. It's a conifer, and you will find a photograph of that here, still growing and healthy. So like this, you will find many other old trees, large trees, and you will also find 75 living trees, each one telling a different story about themselves to you. So, you were mentioning another plant or the loneliest tree?
Well, I was mentioning of, yes, other trees
Yeah,
as
the
well.
loneliest tree I mentioned. From Uttarakhand, you will find 5 trees in my book. And one of them is this famous peepal tree that stands in the clock tower of Dehradun. And there is a clock tower which is considered by many people
famous, the Ghantaghar, as we call
the
it
famous Ghantaghar of
Dehradun.
Dehradun. And it is considered the identity of Dehradun because it chimes and people hear that and so on. It is also believed that, not believed, actually Sarojini Naidu, who was then the governor of central provinces in 1948, she laid the foundation of the clock tower. And it is also believed that she planted a peepal sapling close to it. And that is how the peepal stands in that Ghantaghar circle. When I I started looking up this tree, I found that this tree has been the center of basically controversy for a whole decade, because the powers that we feel that this people is actually spoiling the look of the Ghantaghar, and therefore it should be either relocated or removed from that clock tower circle. When I went and saw this tree, I found that if Sarojini Naidu had planted this, it must be about 72, 73 years old now, but it appeared much more older to me. And I started digging into exactly when this tree actually was planted or who planted it and so on. Now, the clock tower therefore has been in this news. But civil society has seen too much of this kind of destruction in the name of development in Dehradun. So many activists actually went and protested against the removal of this peepal tree. And one day in 2017 or something like that, a whole bunch of people, largely women, dressed in their finest clothes, and went and worshipped this tree and tied Rakhi around its trunk. And then they pledged to support and protect this tree. And all this, dialogues going on between the authorities and the civil society, this act actually resulted in a huge media campaign. And then the government of the day took notice of this, and finally a deal was worked out where they did not have to remove the tree, but they still could renovate the clock tower. So the tree is surviving because of the activism displayed by the local citizens of Dehradun, and the tree is thankfully standing there. Now, coming back to this, whether Sarojini Naidu actually planted the tree, I started asking many people, older people of Dehradun, did you ever see this when you were a child? And some of them said, yes, it has been standing there for several years. And then I traced back a photograph which was apparently taken in 1889. And there is a big peepal tree there with a tonga stand for horses. And there were 2 water tanks in that area where the clock tower was later built. And finally I went to Mr. Ruskin Bond and asked him whether he had seen this tree when he was a young man. And he confirmed that yes, it was already there when I was a young man. So I find that this tree must be at least 150 years old, if not older. And therefore it has a greater claim to be the identity of Dehradun than the built-in clock tower there. And this is, I give this example for 2 or 3 reasons. One is that how built heritage is much more valued in this country than living, breathing heritage. That's the first thing that we must look at. There are other examples in my book where built-in heritage is much more valued, archaeological, architectural heritage. The second thing is usually the trees like this do not get protected through civic action. And in this case, it was very successfully done. For several years, the society, the activists campaigned and made sure that the tree is standing. So I think this was a victory for the environment and for protection of trees and so on and so forth. So there are many other examples in this book which
Yeah,
illustrate.
since we have a lot of youngsters here, the stakeholders, the most important, so what we leave behind and what happens. I would really want you to, just time's running out, but be very nice to just also sort of inspire them. I mean, when Uttarakhand takes pride in the fact that we have we have over 60% of forest cover. However, having said that, we have many iconic species. I mean, down here we got tigers to leopards, snow leopard on top. We got Sarus crane in the Tarai and the Monal in the higher reaches, and all of that. However, what we see now, sort of losing out, is the whole. When you go to our urban spaces, we must have just passed Haldwani. In the last 1 year, I saw every tree of Haldwani chopped down. Haldwani is, ironically, it was named after the Haldu trees, the Adina cardifolia. We saw pretty much every Haldu is now, it's gone from there. And, it feels sad when you look at the young faces. It is almost now sort of depressing now to go to that beautiful city, but for the children especially, so I suppose when they go for a outing or a trip, do not overlook the tree. Give it a second look. Don't just pass it by. These big trees are huge carbon absorbs and all that. So
I would just add to this saying that there are many angles from which you can come at this subject of climate change, environmental degradation, and what have you. My book is all about celebrating the tree wealth that we have. It's good to plant new trees, but more important than that is to appreciate, be aware of the kind of tree wealth that we have. So this book, the main intention would be actually make people aware of the kind of iconic trees that we have in this country. This book, because of page constraints, has listed only 75 trees, but there are so many out there waiting to be discovered, and waiting to be discovered about what is our relationship with those trees and so on. How do we connect to them? How do they connect to the environment? And from awareness will come appreciation. And appreciation will lead to ownership of the trees, and therefore that leads to protection. And protection is very important because they are highly endangered. I can give lots of figures about how many are endangered, what should we do. Some of these are listed here. But enjoy, celebrate, be aware, and then appreciate, and then pass this heritage to the next generation. I think if that is done, I would be most happy that this book contributed in a howsoever minuscule manner it did. Thank you very much. Thank you.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.